Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to the Valentine's Views podcast for Friday. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts across the Big Blue View Radio Network. Giants face the Las Vegas Raiders this week, and unfortunately, there's been no news from either side this week. There's absolutely nothing to talk about. So I have Matt Holder of SB Nation's Silver and Black Pride here with me. But Matt, I have no idea what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll say this: I did get a surprise out on when I was about to go to bed on Tuesday night that we might be able to talk about a little bit there. But yeah,
Yeah,
I guess
yeah.
it's been a
Well,
quiet week.
yeah. Other than that, but that surprise, over here on the East Coast, that surprise kind of hit me when I woke up Wednesday morning. So, but let's start there, and it's the obvious place to start, but we also do a 5 questions, and you and I traded 5 questions, and of course the firing of Josh McDaniels was the big ticket item in that 5 questions. And did you see this coming this soon? I mean, from the tone of your 5 questions answer, it's like you knew that this had to happen eventually, but did you see it coming now?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth right there. I mean, I definitely had a feeling that if at this rate, with the offense not being able to score 20 points, which they haven't done yet this season, and Josh McDaniels obviously spearheading that offense with his choice at quarterback, I had a feeling that he was going to get fired. But yeah, I was still surprised. I didn't think it would happen at the halfway point of the season, or not even the halfway point of the season, because about to hit week 9. So timing of it was definitely shocking, but the end result, not so much. It kind of felt like this was coming, and it just felt like Mark Davis didn't want to delay the inevitable at this point.
What is it about Mark Davis, though? This is what, 8 coaches in 12 years, something crazy like that. I mean, is is Mark Davis the problem more than anything else? What's the deal?
Well, I think part of it is he is his father's son, and if anyone's paid attention to the Raiders and during Al's later years, they know he was not exactly the most patient guy when it came to head coaches. Pretty much the only one that Mark Davis has hired that he's been patient with was Gruden, because Gruden was kind of like his great white buffalo that he'd been wanting to get and lure out of the Monday Night Football booth for years, and then I mean, he didn't even fire. And then when Gruden left, it wasn't even under, or wasn't really up to Mark Davis. It was kind of the whole circumstances around that whole situation. But yeah, I mean, he has to be partially culpable. I mean, like you said, the Raiders have gone through several coaches, and he's hired all of them. He's the only one ultimately making the decisions and that stuff. So he's definitely responsible um, for the hires. And I mean, he's got to get this next one right because, like you said, this is not exactly a great mark on his resume to be churning out so many coaches and so many losing seasons like they have been since he's taken over. So definitely share some responsibility there.
Well, what was it about the Josh McDaniels era that made it a failure? Other than, we can obviously look at the one-loss record, but I guess what was it that made Josh McDaniels a failure as a head coach?
I think part of it is he definitely wasn't the same person he was in Denver, where he was completely off the walls, arrogant, and there was a tweet thread from a guy that used to play for the Broncos back in those days. I believe it was last year. It was talking about how he basically ran his program like a tyrant and was over arrogant, and at the time was the youngest head coach in the NFL, which I think rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And from what I understand, he was definitely not as aggressive this time around. But I think that arrogance and that lack of people skills really kind of reared its head. Like, I don't know how much you guys have been seeing or been paying attention, but this all day on Twitter, they've been talking about all the beat writers who cover the team, talking about how this is the happiest the players have seemed in all season. And really in the last 2 years, they got like a mini hoop in the locker rooms, cornhole sets. So it looks like guys are starting to have a little bit more fun and kind of got rid of the guy that was probably getting under their skins. And I think that was the biggest thing more than anything. That and he's just kind of over arrogant and overconfident in himself. I think he didn't really want to adjust his offense with the skill set they had around him, whether that be Derek Carr at quarterback or this new version of Jimmy Garoppolo that He was probably thinking he was giving the Jimmy Garoppolo from 70 years ago that he had in New England, but that's not the same player that he was getting this time around. So I think it was kind of a little bit of that where he was stubborn of, hey, my system has worked, but it also worked when you had Tom Brady, who's the greatest quarterback of all time. So I think it was a combination really of his just lack of people skills and over arrogance that kind of really did him in as a head coach and has been the reason why he's failed at 2 spots now.
Yeah, and he'll never get another head coaching opportunity.
Oh no, no.
But let's talk about the interesting choice that the Raiders made for interim head coach. When when he was with the New York Giants, Patrick Graham, who is the Raiders defensive coordinator, was looked at as an up and coming head coach. He was or up and coming coordinator. He was looked at as a guy who would become an NFL head coach someday. I believe, he even got a couple of head coaching interviews. I think he turned down an interview with the Jets at one time. Then I think he got an interview, for the Giants job eventually that eventually went to Brian Daboll. But for me, I'm interested in the choice of Antonio Pierce, who Giants fans know really, really well, of course, from his time with New York, from his leadership, of a Giants Super Bowl winning defense. But I'm interested to know, from a Raiders fan perspective, if there's any surprise that the Raiders went to Pierce instead of Graham.
I think there was a little bit of surprise just because it was like a who are they going to pick in that kind of sense. I don't know if there was much surprise that it wasn't Patrick Graham per se. I think a lot of people, with how the defense performed last year, were kind of down on Patrick Graham. Now, defense this year has played out of their minds, and I actually give Patrick Graham a lot of credit. So I don't think there was like much of like, oh, why not Patrick Graham? It was more of just a who is it going to be kind of deal. I totally understand where you're coming from, where it's, Graham's been viewed as a head coaching candidate. I just know typically when you get an interim situation like this, usually, they kind of promote either like a special teams coordinator or a position coach that was a former player. Like Dan Campbell, if you remember a few years ago, he was the tight ends coach for the Dolphins, I believe, when they fired Gase. Maybe I have the timeline wrong on that, but that's typically who they like to pick. And I think part of it is you're not obviously going to be able to hire a new defensive coordinator in the middle of the season, and they obviously have a lot of responsibilities versus a regular position coach. So I think it's a little bit easier. And plus, Antonio Pierce, I think him being a relatively recent retired player, at least compared to the other guys on the staff, I think that made him a good candidate. And like you said, been a good leader, been a good guy that I think will be a good motivator and all that kind of stuff that you're really looking for from a head coach. So I'm excited to see what he can do.
I guess it does make it easier in the sense that you're making enough changes, and they wanted to make changes
Right.
on the offensive side of the ball. And at least if you don't elevate Patrick Graham, then you're basically leaving the defense alone. So you're not
Exactly.
changing everything.
Exactly.
I just thought it was interesting because I kind of figured, eventually Antonio Pierce would rise up the ranks as well. I guess the question is, with Antonio Pierce, does he have a legitimate shot at getting this job, beyond the interim label? The last time the Raiders had an interim head coach, Rich Bisaccia, did great, way better than anticipated, way better than expected, and it didn't matter. The Raiders
Yeah.
just moved on and hired, Josh McDaniels. I'm guessing that Mark Davis is going to want to go out and hire a brand name, hire a guy he can kind of give the keys to the kingdom to. I'm guessing that Antonio Pierce might be in the same kind of situation where it's not going to matter how well he does.
Yeah, Mark Davis came out and said this week that Antonio Pierce has a chance to, or the Antonio Pierce and Chip Kelly, who's the interim GM, both of them have a chance to kind of earn the full-time jobs this year. I just don't know how much I would buy that because of, like you said, like the last time they had an interim head coach, the guy took them to the playoffs and it didn't seem to matter. They still canned them. So I kind of take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. I kind of feel like Antonio Pierce is walking into a situation too that's not really favorable, which I mean, usually when you're an interim coach and the other guy gets fired, that's typically the case. Is it's not exactly a good team where you're not exactly set up to succeed. So I mean, I guess technically, if we're going by Mark Davis's word, he has a chance. But yeah, I kind of get the same feeling as you that this was more of a move to kind of get you through the rest of the season in the back half of the year, and then he's probably going to want to bring in, his guy and that guy, or his guy or pick as head coach, and hopefully it's a better pick than his last one.
Matt, let's talk a little bit about the Raiders on the field. Let's talk a little bit about them offensively and defensively. Now, the Giants are to this point the worst team in the NFL on offense. They're averaging 11 and a half points a game, which is embarrassing. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Injuries to Saquon Barkley, injuries to the offensive line, some poor quarterback play, which I think has been a result of some of those other injuries, or at least partially caused by some of those other injuries. It's been a dysfunctional mess all season long. The Raiders haven't been much better. And
No.
beyond, I think it's 15 points a game. I think 30th in the league in scoring. Beyond the McDaniels factor, can you just talk a little bit about what's gone on, about where the shortcomings have been with that offense?
Well, I think a big part of it was Jimmy Garoppolo, to be honest with you. Jimmy Garoppolo, this has probably been the worst I've ever seen him play. I followed his career somewhat closely with him playing for the Niners. And I can tell you, he had bad happy feet in the pocket when the pressure started coming in San Francisco. It's gotten worse this year, where it's basically like as soon as he doesn't see his first reads open, he starts to panic a little bit. And I think that's been a big issue. The offensive line they've been solid in pass protection, but they've definitely regressed from last year, which is weird because they have basically everybody back. The only change is at right guard, which was the weak link last year. It swapped out Alex Bars for Greg Van Roten. And then part of that too is in the running game. They were never great run blockers. I didn't even think they were that great last year when Josh Jacobs won the rushing title. They've gotten even worse this year. On PFF, like Jacobs is averaging like less than 1 yard before first contact. The last time I checked on it. So he's kind of getting the ball and having to make somebody miss right away. He hasn't been quite the same either. Going back to Garoppolo a little bit, him and Devontae Adams haven't been on the same page. I don't know if you guys saw the Monday night game where Garoppolo was missing Devontae pretty much everywhere but hitting him. Long, deep, short, behind him, everything else in between. So that's been an issue too because Devontae hasn't been the guy that we've been used to seeing him over the last few years. So I'm kind of hopeful that the switch to Aiden O'Connell will push things around a little bit. With Jimmy Garoppolo too, he wasn't pushing the ball down the field, so they were getting 8 and 9 man boxes, which you don't see very often in today's version of the NFL. So again, hopefully that quarterback change will push the ball down the field a little bit and force teams into those to get that safety out of the box and then help the run game a little bit too. But yeah, it's been a collection of a lot of things. McDaniels was part of it, but yeah, the offensive line definitely needs to play better. Running game's got to get going, and then hopefully Aiden O'Connell can help give the passing game a lift too.
What is it that you think the Raiders like about O'Connell, other than the fact that he's not Jimmy Garoppolo?
Well, I think I think what you just said is a big piece of it, at least in the fan base for sure. But I think with Aiden O'Connell is one of the things is he's accurate. He was with Purdue. I think he broke Drew Brees' record for completion percentage or something like that. And he's really good in like the short to intermediate areas. And he takes measured shots too. That was something that I was really impressed with him in the preseason that I didn't kind of expect just from watching him at Purdue. Is he wasn't a guy that's going to bomb it down the field a bunch of times. But when he did, he was efficient and he would hit it, and it would be 1 or 2 throws. But it was again something that would work and at least keep defenses honest. So I think that's one of the biggest things is, he's accurate, he's decisive with the ball, which is rare for a rookie. And then 2, like he's willing to take those shots, and I think kind of understands the offense a little bit better than Garoppolo at least showed on game days.
All right, let's talk about the Raiders defensively a little bit. I mean, how much are Raiders fans sort of frothing at the mouth and waiting for Max Crosby to line up against Evan Neal?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were looking forward to that matchup. I mean, Max has had an unreal year. I mean, even last week, I thought he was going to have a tough time with Penei Sewell because Penei Sewell, I think, is one of the better or at least up and coming offensive tackles in the league. Crosby kind of ate his lunch. They needed to give Penei Sewell help in the second half a lot, and I think that's definitely a matchup that a lot of Raider fans are going to be looking forward to. I know I definitely think that's going to tilt in the Raiders' favor because Max has been on a mission. He's been a madman this year, and he's hard to stop. He's someone that you kind of have to account for with two guys every single time, and sometimes you have to even account for him with two guys when he's on the backside of a run. He's just been that unreal this year and taking his game to another level. And then on top of it, too, he's an amazing pass rusher. Where again, you better chip him because if you leave your tackle one on one, he's probably going to win.
So what else? We know it's a Patrick Graham defense, which means Patrick's going to basically design his defense from back to front. He's going to play coverage. He's not going to blitz a ton. He's basically going to try to disguise coverage and fool quarterbacks that way. Who else on that defense really, other than Crosby, who else or what else do the Giants have to account for?
Yeah, I think one guy that's definitely kind of what you're talking about that goes in line with, having disguised coverages and all that stuff is Trevon Merrick. Last year with Patrick Graham, he wasn't quite as good. They tried putting him in man coverage against tight ends, and that's not his game. That's not what he wants to do. But what he is really good is he's a good zone safety where if you put him in multiple spots and kind of move him around and keep defenses guessing, he can make a lot of plays. And he's played a lot better this year. I think he has 2 interceptions already, which leads the team and is huge for a team that struggled to get picks last year, and it's already a career high for him. So he's kind of the number 2 that I've been really impressed with on the defense this year so far. The defensive linemen, the defensive tackles, kind of hit and miss. John Jenkins is a good run defender who occasionally will get a pressure every now and again. Adam Butler is another guy that's been popping up lately more as a pass rusher on the interior. And then too, they have Malcolm Kuntz, who's had a few moments, just can't put it consistently. And then there's the rookie Tyree Wilson, who's still kind of figuring it out. So they are definitely, as a unit, over exceeding expectations. I think they're like the Raiders have like the second fewest cap space allocated to their defense. And I mean, for what they've been or for what they have, like they've been playing lights out and they've been playing out of their minds. So it's definitely a group that doesn't have a whole lot of names, but they're playing well as a unit right now and as a whole. And I think, that's something we definitely saw last Monday night too, against a really good offense where they were able to keep them out of the end zone for a while and hold them to a lot of field goals in the red zone.
So tell me a little bit, when you look at this game, and you look at the Giants, obviously we talked about the Giants offense has struggled to score, but this week you've got Daniel Jones coming back. You have a healthy Saquon Barkley. The Giants might have their 2 starting offensive tackles, Andrew Thomas, who's a tremendous player, and Evan Neal back. So they might be, relatively whole on offense, although Darren Waller, who you guys know really, really well, is not going to play because of another hamstring injury, which he's already admitted is going to cost him a few weeks. But, so we know that the Giants could be better offensively, or at least positioned to be better. They've played really well on defense the last few weeks. When you look at this game from a Raiders perspective, what things are there about the Giants that concern you?
I think one of the biggest concerns is Dexter Lawrence. I mean, that guy's been one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL over the last few years. And the Andre James, he's been, a solid to average center at best. But one thing that he really struggles with is a good nose tackle that lines up right over the ball. And obviously, that's how the Giants like to use Dexter Lawrence. So I think that's kind of the biggest matchup that I'm worried about that can really derail the Raiders' offense and definitely tilts in the Giants' favor. As far as anything I think that shifts in the Raiders' favor, I definitely think, what we were talking about, the Max Crosby versus Evan Neal or whoever's that right tackle will help them out. I believe the Giants are a little beat up on the interior too, if I'm not mistaken. So I like how that matches up with the Raiders and what they've been able to do this year. But it's an interesting game because 2 teams that I think have a lot of similar issues, and not exactly. It could be we could be in for an interesting or not so interesting Sunday afternoon with without a whole lot of scoring.
Well, at least we hope that the Giants this week will actually not play 1930s football and will actually attempt
There you
some
go.
forward passes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll see how that goes. Hey, Matt, let's wrap this up with we'll do a little predictions. We'll do our little game predictions here, but before we do that, let's read our little sponsorship from DraftKings Sportsbook, which sponsors this section of our podcast. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling by calling 888-789-7777 or visiting ccpc.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, licensee partner Golden Nugget, Lake Charles, Louisiana. 21 and over, age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. All right, Matt, when I picked this game, the weekly picks that we use at SB Nation, most of our sites use the tally site software to do picks, and when I did my picks this week, I picked the Giants. Maybe that's a homer pick. I think my entire staff picked the Giants, which definitely is a homer pick. And it always concerns me when all of us do that, especially in a game that I look at and I see as a 50-50 game that could go either way. The biggest thing that concerns me about the Raiders is the thing that we talked about already regarding the Josh McDaniels firing. It lifted a cloud of
Yep.
angst, unhappiness, despair, whatever you want to call it. The Las Vegas Raiders players are a lot happier today than they were on Tuesday. And the other part of that is I have no idea how good a head coach Antonio Pierce is going to be, but I know he can motivate men. I know he can lead people. And there's oftentimes there's just an emotional bump sometimes for a week or two when you get a thing like this to happen, especially maybe with a guy who can motivate the way Antonio Pierce can. And that's the thing that concerns me about this game. I think the Giants can win it. I think they'll put up more points than they've been putting up. But so as I said, I'm picking the Giants, but how do you see it? And do you agree with me that the Raiders could get just an emotional bump, especially being at home?
Yeah, I mean, if it makes you feel any better, I think everyone on our site picked the Raiders, so we're just going straight homer picks across the board, I guess, over at SB
Th-
Nation this week. So,
there you go. There you
uh,
go.
but yeah, no, exactly what you said. Like, I agree 100%. I think Antonio Pierce, I think he is or he already has been, uplifting the spirits like we were talking about earlier. His introductory press conference, I think, got a lot of at least Raider fans fired up for what he was saying. He was talking about growing up in Compton in LA and growing up a Raider fan. So I think there's definitely going to be a little bit more inspiration where I actually on DraftKings for my prop bets, I actually put that the Raiders gave out the pick of the Raiders scoring first because I think they do come out of the gate swinging a little bit, come out with a little more momentum. And on top of it, too, they're also coming home after a really tough 2-game road trip where they got blown out by the Bears, lost by 2 possessions, and got embarrassed on Monday Night Football against the Lions. So I think there's a lot of motivation and a lot of, external factors that we can't put on a stat sheet that are working in the Raiders' favor that I think can really help them out, especially, again, coming back and playing at home, a little road trip for the Giants there. So definitely, like you said, I think it's a coin flip game if you remove all the emotions out of it. I think when you have the advantage that the Raiders have, when you bring that back into the equation, then I think they can definitely get the job done and win. And hopefully we'll see a little bit more, a little bit better offensive performance than what we've been seeing. So,
As I said, I think it's the emotional component of this game that concerns me, especially at home, in front of Raiders fans who who seem to have managed to travel fairly well from Oakland to
Yeah.
Las Vegas. It
Yeah.
seems to have not mattered.
Yeah, it's
So,
I mean, I think part of the Raiders being, the nomads of the NFL has kind of helped grow the fan base, as frustrating as it can be from them moving from Oakland to LA, back to Oakland and now to Vegas. So definitely think that helps. Plus, not too many teams over here on the West Coast, so we get a lot of the Hawaii fans and all that stuff, and other states that didn't have franchises for a while, like Arizona. So definitely a good fan base that likes to travel.
all right, Matt, appreciate a little bit of time, a little bit of insight about the Raiders, folks. Check out SB Nation's Silver and Black Pride, where Matt is a contributor. If you want the Raiders' perspective on this week's game, and as always, Giants fans, thank you for listening. Stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.